June 21, the 25th Tuesday of 2022. And it's just about 7:37 at Q95, the big station. We're live on Facebook and YouTube, so please share the live, like our page, and get the latest breaking news and happenings as it happens, only on Q95, the big station. My guest tonight, Mr. David Gumbs, Mr. McCathy Marie, and Dr. Kaithlyn Bunker. I will tell you a lot more about Dr. Bunker when I introduce her a bit later. McCathy Marie obviously is very well known by all and needs very little introduction. Of course, I will tell you about Mr. David Gumbs when I introduce him because he's likely to be the opening batsman in our innings here tonight. So we're looking forward to hearing him and Dr. Bunker as well. So we are continuing our efforts at reviving the spirit of graciousness, as we always say, of love and peace and prosperity and unity among our Dominican, Kalinago, and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters, our people. Our topic tonight is solutions to the rising cost of energy in Dominica. We want your views. Call us. We had planned to have a conversation on crime and social responsibility tonight, but I got a call sometime earlier today from Matt Macmillan to do something tonight in light of the major issue of rising fuel and electricity rates, which are affecting everything and skyrocketing the cost of living and the cost of doing business. So I made this last minute change to accommodate this discussion tonight, which I believe is very timely. So big shout out to Matt Macmillan, wherever you are at this time. Hope you're having a good one and listening to us right now. So we'll have the conversation on crime next Tuesday night. But for tonight, here are some of the talking points that we can look at in this conversation. Dominica's electricity bills increased some 46% since 2015. So the question is, why is solar preferable to fossil fuels, to wind, wave, and geothermal technology, given the cost of fuel, of fossil fuel? So what role can geothermal energy play, and not only in producing and generating electricity, but producing byproducts like hydrogen for export? Can it play a role in doing that? Can hydrogen be produced in Dominica cost effectively? And if so, can it be produced in such large quantities as a derivative of geothermal energy? And can it become even more profitable than the geothermal energy itself? We look at those questions. Maybe Mark Marie will help us to decipher some of those. So how does the war in Ukraine impact us here in the Caribbean and in particular in Dominica? How is solar helping bring down electricity costs elsewhere in the region? So what about upfront costs? What are solar microgrids? How do they work? How can they help small economies, so small communities across Dominica? How good is the battery technology these days? A lot of people are wondering about the batteries. I mean, this is the big thing, the batteries, right? So what sort of cost savings can regular consumers expect? And how long will it take to realize those savings? Are these examples elsewhere? Are there examples elsewhere in the region that have had benefits from solar in terms of the cost of savings for consumers? So hopefully Mr. David Gumbs, Mr. McCathy Marie, and Dr. Kaithlyn Bunker will help us identify some specific issues, some concerns, some experiences, of course, situations, occurrences, and events, and of course, help us with some answers associated with these important questions. They will discuss, I'm sure, the good, the bad, the ugly, and even the dangerous aspects of all of this. No anger, no malice, no personal attacks, no vilification, no divisiveness, just bringing back civility, a caring society, and good governance. Recognizing the imperative for justice without delays and the resilience and sustainability of our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. So the voices of the Dominican people, your voices at home and abroad, take priority on what you see as the solutions to fix these persistent issues, challenges, and concerns. So stay tuned to this space for another great debate, get the answers to your questions, and be part of the solution. Wherever you are in Dominica, in the region, and globally, you're on this conversation right now on the Global View on Q, and have your say as you do every Tuesday with me, Mr. G, only on Q95, the big station. So as usual, a huge shout out, hugs, much love and appreciation, and a big thank you to our healthcare providers and frontline workers doing their very best to keep us safe from the deadly coronavirus and its new variants, and often working under very difficult conditions. Please follow the correct advice, guidelines, and protocols. Play it safe, stay alive. Happy to have you with us tonight. Welcome you warmly and embrace you wherever you are, in every nook and cranny, in every village and every community in Dominica, in the region, and globally. Thank you to our engineer Sherwin Norris, giving us on the air in crystal clear liquid stereo, and to Lambert Lambie Charles, who's on the console right now. How are you doing, Lambie? At Q95, directing the traffic. Lambie will direct your calls to us a little later on. We make the people's voice a priority tonight. We will take your calls. We'll have 3 ad breaks, and then Lambie will give the numbers and he'll take your calls. So let's get started. I want to go first, as I said earlier, to Mr. David Gumbs to get the conversation going tonight as we pursue solutions to the rising cost of energy in Dominica. David Gumbs, of course, is the former chief executive officer of the Anguilla Electricity Company. David is a graduate of the University of Hartford with a Master's of Science in Accounting, and of course, Connecticut College. He has a Bachelor of Science in Economics and Atlantis and African Studies. David is a certified public accountant with more than 20 years operational and managerial experience. Some of David's former roles include Chief Financial Officer at Angelec and Senior Director, Treasurer and Financial Analysis at Sodeco. And so under David's leadership, Angelec embraced renewable energy technologies and achieved one of the region's highest penetration levels in 2016. Successfully negotiated several solar PV waste, energy power and purchase agreements for the integration of alternative energy sources into Angelec's generation portfolio. David implemented an aggressive public relations and marketing strategy that strengthened the company's brand and customer satisfaction scores and improved, of course, the company's performance. We brought efficiencies and cost savings to the organizations by incorporating industry solutions such as advanced metering, grid automation, work order automation, and wide vehicle management into Angelic's operations. So recognizing the company's exposure to severe hurricanes, David launched the company's first aggressive undergrounding initiative in 2018. Most notably, David led the historic Hurricane Irma recovery efforts. Remember that? Restoring the grid to 100% in 100 days. Hurricane Irma devastated the island, destroying over 60% of its infrastructure under David's leadership and in the collaboration with colleagues throughout the region and various partners, including CARELEC, the UK government, and the government of Anguilla. The island's grid was restored in record time, earning much recognition. So there's a lot that we can say about David, but he's here with you in person tonight. And David, I want to thank you for being here with us. And I yield over to you now. You turn on your mic, so let's get the conversation going.
Yeah, good evening, Sheridan. Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be back on the program this evening. And like you said, it's a very timely subject matter. So I'm happy to be part of the conversation. With that said, I guess I should jump right in and let you know the reason why we are so passionate, and the reason why we're here this evening is to try and get the word out and get some solutions on the table. We, RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, have been doing a lot of work in the region for the past 10 years or so, and we've been working with many countries throughout the region. I've been with the institution about 2 years, and the conversation has been ongoing and deep as to how we could transition the region to a carbon-free source of energy generation, but not only carbon-free, one that is more cost-effective than the means in which we do it throughout the region. Now, with that said, naturally, in the Caribbean, we have an abundance of renewable energy sources, wind, solar, or the sun. And in Dominica's case, you even have hydro, which is a great advantage. And I know you teed up geothermal earlier, which is something that Dominica and a couple other islands in the region are trying to exploit. So we welcome the discussion around this. But for us, for the moment that we're in today, it's a moment that is creating much anxiety and creating much stress for the region. As bill payers, we are all feeling the shock of the current geopolitics, global geopolitics. And unfortunately, we're susceptible to that. We're susceptible to just about everything that happens in larger developed countries. In this case, the war in Ukraine, a Russia-Ukraine war, is causing much hardship for us globally, but for the region, even more so, because we are very, very dependent on fossil fuels. And Russia, as a primary source of one of the major sources of oil, which we depend on as being part of the global market, we feel the impact of any events that happen there, any shocks that happen there. And this current shock has caused us in the region to basically experience high gasoline prices. All right. And there's an argument that we should be switching from combustion engines using gasoline in our vehicles to electric vehicles. But we're going to save that discussion for another day. And then we also have, which is right before us, and something we actually can do something about immediately today, is use something that is very practical, that is very cost effective for us, and that is to transition to renewable energy. In some countries in the region, renewable energy could reduce our cost by up to 50%. And particularly solar renewable energy can reduce our costs up to 50%. This is something that we cannot avoid having a discussion about, because we feel they're very easy steps that can be taken, very practical steps that can be taken. And it's been demonstrated by several countries in the region. So that's something that we really, really want to put on the table today. We know there's a lot more to talk about. We know there's a lot of other energy sources that we can explore. But the one thing we want to come across with today is that we need to make an immediate step to relieve the pressure from our communities.
Yes, of course, David. Thank you for that brief introduction. Of course, all of these issues I raised in the talking points, I believe we'll come back around to deal with some of those as we get into the substance of the discussion here tonight. But let me very quickly go over to Dr. Kaithlyn Bunker and introduce her, because she's not been on my show before, and I'm delighted to have you here tonight. I feel honored to have you, Dr. Bunker. Appreciate that you could make it here tonight. And Dr. Bunker is a PhD. He is coordinator of RMI Islands Energy Program. She leads a diverse team that partners with islands in the Caribbean to support and accelerate their clean energy transitions. The team completes energy modeling and technical analysis to develop integrated resource plans, prepares and de-risks resilient clean energy projects, and connects energy professionals in regional communities of practice. She has worked closely with stakeholders in St. Lucia and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Belize, the British Virgin Islands, the Turks and Caicos Islands, and Bermuda. So Kaithlyn also leads modeling efforts related to small island microgrid opportunities. So obviously, Dr. Kaithlyn Bunker, you have quite a bit of experience working with the region. And it is interesting that you're here with us tonight, and you're going to share with us vast knowledge that you've had from those experiences and those interactions. So please, if you turn on your mic, and we're very happy to have you here tonight with us.
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction and for having me. It's great to be here. I have worked in the Caribbean region for almost 8 years now, focused on energy, and now have the opportunity to co-lead the Islands Energy Program at RMI, as you mentioned, with David. So I think we're a great team. David brings the finance and accounting experience, and of course his direct experience leading the utility in Anguilla. And I come from an engineering background, electrical engineering. So I like to run the numbers, build the models of power systems today and what they could look like in the future with our island partners. And so what I'll offer as a introduction or starting point here is what I've learned from working with many different islands in the region is that each island has its own priorities, right? Typically, lowering electricity costs is the top priority. For some islands, increasing their resilience of their energy system is key. For others, high reliability, meaning keeping the lights on all the time, not necessarily in an outage, a shock event, but consistent, reliable electricity all the time. For some islands, it's around environmental sustainability and the impact that they're having towards climate change. For some, it's around local economic development and jobs, right? Typically, we hear a mix of these different priorities, but each island may put one above the other in terms of what's most important to them. So what our program has done is look at each island, work with the stakeholders and the people there to really understand what is most important for them, and then solve for that solution. What type of energy transition would meet their priorities best? And so that looks a bit different in each island, depending on what resources they have, what's going to be best to meet those priorities. Typically, what we've seen every place, though, is a mix of renewable energy being able to meet those priorities, in particular, lowering costs. As David was saying, especially today with the high costs of fuel that are leading to high costs of electricity for everyone globally, but in particular in the Caribbean, big opportunity to lower those costs by using renewable energy. And we, as a nonprofit organization, aren't, supporting a certain technology over another, but want to find what's the best mix and the best pathway for each specific island to meet those priorities, including lowering costs. So excited to talk about some of the renewable options today and what might look best in Dominica for your priorities.
Yes, and we're looking forward to that because I think we really need to have that conversation because given the circumstances now, I mean, the entire world is in disarray now because of what is going on in Ukraine. And it's going to create havoc in some of the African countries as well. And so it's very important for us to look at this tonight. I think it's very timely. Mark, I wanted to go over to you because I know you've been involved in trying to bring renewable energy into Dominica for quite some time now. And you may not have been focused so much on solar. You may have looked more geothermal and wind and so on, but maybe you can tell us, Mark, some of what you've done and see how we're going to bring all this together as we continue the conversation here tonight.
Actually, it's Mr. Douglas Washway, as most people in Dominica know him, although his official name is Adenauer. That's one that he was named after one of the chancellors of Germany. His father, if you notice, his father named all his sons after some important world figure.
Right.
So he got Adenauer. He invited me to join a group that had been started, which included some Dominicans in the diaspora, to talk about renewable energy in Dominica. And one of the first things that were being looked at actually was wind power. And in fact, Mr. Douglas, because he's an electrical engineer, so he was more in tune with these technical things. I'm an economist. My role in the organization was not as economist. My role was, you might say, political advisor. And I say political advisor because the people that we are hoping to hook up with and to sell energy to are the French overseas departments, which are Martinique to the south of us and Guadeloupe to the north of us. The political system over there, however, is pretty complex for most Dominicans or most other Caribbean people to understand. But we understand we were first self-governing, then we became independent. Whereas Martinique and Guadeloupe were kind of semi-self-governing, then they became less self-governing and returned the power to France, with the result that the political system on each island, or both islands actually, are somewhat complex and complicated for Dominicans and most Caribbean people from the English-speaking islands to understand. I understood it pretty well because we've been involved in doing business, particularly music business, who were in the public eye. And both Ophelia, who's my wife, and myself speak, read and write French excellently. So I could understand the way this society was organized. And that's what Mr. Douglas actually brought me into the organization for. But Not that I know all that science, but if you explain anything to me that's written in English or French, I can understand it pretty easily. And I know a little bit of geology, if you wish, because in high school we were taught that the center of the earth is hot. It's very hot. So when somebody says there's energy under our feet, I can understand that pretty easily. But I understand that like energy comes in different forms, and the most common form is heat. And then you can transform heat into other forms that you can use. For example, a nuclear power plant, I kind of found out, is actually basically running an old time steam engine. That's what it is. It heats up water and it runs a steam engine like somewhat like Mr. Watt's original steam engine, which was run on coal, except it's run on splitting atoms. No, you know. So I could understand that. So it didn't take me long to understand the principles governing the geothermal exploitation. And of course, we know that Dominica is a kind of curious place. We are the only island in the entire Caribbean that has more than one volcano. And I think we have the most volcanoes per square foot of island. We have 9 separate volcanoes, not 9 peaks of one volcano, 9 separate volcanoes, each with their own chamber. So Dominica has potentially a huge amount of power under the ground, which is not difficult to access. Um, and that energy would allow us to do a number of things. One, let me just backtrack a little bit. The, the economics of power production usually depends on scale. Yes, you must have scale, produce in fairly large quantities for your prices to be, you might say, low. The reason we haven't developed geothermal energy since the 1970s, when we were quite aware that it was there, was because we were thinking, well, if we were to do this project here, the cost of doing that per unit of energy would be so high that nobody in Dominica practically would be able to have any electricity. So it was cheaper to run electricity in Dominica from diesel plants and the hydropower which we had quite a while ago. And then in the 1980s, when the Freedom Party came into power, they then commissioned a new and expanded hydro plant, which now produces about 30 to 35% of our electricity needs. And the reason for the variability has to do with the amount of rainfall that falls in any particular year. Yes. So we have renewable energy, which has been running for quite a while in Dominica, but it's concentrated on hydro, and only one hydro, it's not one generator, it's one hydro system that has one, two, three generating stations, one of which is right next to my house there. It was damaged during Hurricane Maria, and I've seen a contract, a tender go out for re-establishing it. So we have hydropower. However, we understood, that is principally Mr. Douglas and myself, that if you were to get seriously into the production of energy, we could have two outcomes. One, we could drive down the cost of energy to the households if we produce it on a large enough scale. But Dominica's consumption is about 20 megawatts. Is not a large enough scale for us to get into geothermal at a large scale to bring down the cost. But if we exported it to the French islands, which is not difficult to do, we just lay the cables between Dominica to Martinique, Dominica to Guadeloupe on the sea cable, and then the power is available over there. So we worked diligently with the authorities in Martinique and Guadeloupe, we say the local authorities, by the way, to develop and discuss the question of how we could move forward to have the geothermal plant established in Dominica. And by the way, Guadeloupe is the only island in the Caribbean for now that actually has a geothermal plant running. There are some political moves around the geothermal plant in Guadeloupe, but that's for another discussion. So we visited the plant a number of times. We held discussions with the people. We also held discussions with the people from the French Geological Research Department, BRGM is French acronym, and we actually signed a memorandum of understanding with the CFG, which is the company that ran the geothermal plant in Guadeloupe, to develop the geothermal energy in Dominica. So the process that has been carried out so far was always the process that we had discussed, and we knew where the funding was coming from. So unfortunately, there were certain errors made and misunderstandings on the part of some of the persons involved in authorizing and getting the official stamp of approval to move forward with the project. With the result that the French electricity company, Electricité de France, EDF, in 2011 announced that they were no longer interested in the project. That is to say, they were no longer interested in being part of the production facility of the geothermal energy. However, if we could bring it to them in Guadeloupe and Martinique, they would be happy to buy it. Which of course put an entire different spin on the entire thing that had been commenced by the government to do the preliminary investigations as to whether the geothermal energy was suitable, because in St. Lucia they had made an error. They drilled holes into the ground only to find out that I don't say toxicity, but yeah, or acidity, but yeah, probably sort of acidity. The context of the geothermal fluid was such that there was no known metal that would resist corrosion from it. Therefore, they couldn't go forward with it. But they did drill holes at a place, La Soufrière, where geothermal energy seemed to be present. So up to now, St. Lucia hasn't really gone further forward with that.
So Mark, I wanted to sort of let us fast forward a little bit. Because we see where we are today. The geothermal project, as it was conceptualized at that time, did not go forward for a number of reasons. Some of it,
right,
a number of reasons. We are where we are today, and the French probably would be interested if it could be brought to them, but it's not cost effective for Dominica to think of laying all this cable and taking it to them. I don't think as it is there today. So we are talking about still talking about the possibility of geothermal, because the government of Dominica is pursuing it. It's actively pursuing it, right? And they've got a certain distance. But we know that there are other options as well. And I think we certainly will want to, and we'll come back to the geothermal, because we will want to continue exploring that, because at the level of the policy directorate, they're pursuing it.
Right.
So that is part of the national objective. But then again, there are options. And I think a basket of different options probably can work with us. And tonight we're talking about solar. And I know that as an engineer, Dr. Bentley, you would be very interested also in all of what Mark is saying, because you can see all of that is of great interest to you. But I know that David, we came here to talk about these things, and we're looking at how all of this, whether it's a combination of geothermal and wind and solar and salt, whatever it is that you do, a wave. The idea is that what you really ultimately want to do, you want clean energy. So you reduce your carbon footprint, right? To make your environment more conducive and more healthy for everybody around, right? And at the same time, you want to be cost effective. You want to produce in a way that's cost effective. You can sell and you can consume, and you can enhance your ability to develop your industry, because then you're competitive, because you have lower costs of energy, right? Let's talk about some of those aspects of it, David, because I certainly think that we need to give, we sort of rationalize this thing and see where, put the thing in context to see how we can go forward and why we should go forward with solar.
Yeah, all of the discussion thus far has been great because it sets up the context and the environment, where we are today and how we got here and the potential for Dominica in particular, right? So it is something that is great discussion. Um, and I know from an RMI perspective, um, we work with islands to lay out a pathway that suits the context. And Kaithlyn spoke to that earlier, and she'll speak to that even more. Um, what I do want to sort of say is that in terms of where we are today, I think we're technology agnostic for as a sorry, my daughter is
That's okay.
I was trying to keep straight the camera, but the dog ran in and my daughter is chasing her. Yeah,
Let's say hi. Let's say hi to her. Let's say hi to her.
Kaithlyn, want to say hi?
Hi, how are you doing? Good to see you. Mark,
All right,
is your mic on, Mark? Could you turn up your mic? I'm getting a little feedback. Go right ahead, David.
all right. So yeah, we're technology agnostic in the sense that we don't champion or promote any particular one technology. But what we are also is very practical, and we try to understand, but we definitely want to work within the moment. And the moment right now is one that we can't ignore. And I'm very passionate about this because I crunch the numbers day in, day out. And the numbers today stand as this. In the Caribbean, and our headline in the op-ed said, electricity rates have increased 46% from 2015, that kind of stuff, right? Well, that doesn't mean much for most people. What really means a lot is what they're paying on their bills today, right? And what we have found, all of our analyses and the work that we're doing and the projects that we're working on in the region, solar offers a unique opportunity, even so more now. And that is because of two things. The cost has declined tremendously in the last 10, particularly in the last 5 years. They did go back up slightly, 10, 15% in the last year or so because of the supply chain challenges we're all facing. But that's nothing compared relative to where the cost is today. And I'll put it in some numbers. Where we are in terms of the cost of solar for the region, we're roughly 10 cents per kilowatt hour. There's some who can do it at massive scale, like Jamaica, who can get 6 cents per kilowatt hour. There are others who manage to get somewhere between 6 and 10. But for smaller islands, smaller grids like Dominica, Anguilla, and some of the smaller islands in the region, we're talking about roughly 10 cents. And when I say 10 cents, we don't need to be doing mega projects at 50 megawatts and 20 megawatts or even 10 megawatts. We're talking about projects under 5 megawatts and even at the 1 megawatt scale. So when we talk about Dominica's grid being roughly, I think it's roughly 20 megawatts thereabout, we're talking, if you do a project at 1 megawatt of solar today, it can cost you 10 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, that's just the cost to generate the electricity. All right. You still have the cost to distribute and transmit that electricity, which any given technology will still have. So from a grid perspective, Dominic would still have to transmit that electricity to individuals' homes. But we have an opportunity to make that investment today. And here's why. Here's the real reason why I think it's absolutely critical for us to make it happen. And that is, in today's climate, the payback for solar investment, we're talking about a payback of roughly 3 years. I've seen some analyses that even make it 2 years. But let's say on the normal conditions, no super negotiations and just a little mishap here and there in the implementation process, we're talking about 3-year payback for an investment in solar today. Now, when I sort of keep my ear to the ground and try to understand how long this current crisis will last, nobody could say when it's going to come to an end. Everyone is thinking this thing will last for some time. But let's say it goes away rather quickly, 2, maybe 3 years. What we're talking about still, if we go back to 6 months ago and where solar prices were then, we're still talking about a payback that could be in the range of 5 years. So what that says to me is that this is a solution that we know is technically sound. It can work. We have a long way to go and a huge opportunity before us for us to make a decision today. And if the climate remains as it is today, hopefully it doesn't, because we know that that's creating a lot of hardship on all of us, we can make sure have that payback or avoid additional costs in electricity. 3 years from now, it will be paid off and basically given us everything that that solar farm produces will be essentially free. Okay, so that's why I think it's very critical, and that's why we're kind of pushing forward the discussion in our op-ed and pushing forward the discussion here because of that short time frame to have an absolute payback and essentially free electricity after that.
Clearly, there seems to be a good rationale for it. I want to go over to you because you're on the technical side, doctor. And when we look at, well, I wouldn't, when I come back after, I'll talk to David again about the question of comparing the cost of solar and the payback period, solar versus fossil, right? Because it comes down to making an investment, making a choice and making an investment, right? A long-term investment. So we'll take a look at that and we'll compare it to see what really makes sense. I mean, not only the other benefits of having clean energy, but the actual cost benefits, that's what I'm looking at. And as you say, the payback period is critical. It's very, very important. So I want to go with you because tell us a little bit more about this, because on the technical side, you can see, because we're really looking to make choices in the region. I think that is what you are exploring, David. We need to make some choices in the region. And you're thinking that the choice for solar is a better choice at this time and maybe in the long term, right? For a number of reasons. And you'll give us all of the reasons why you think it's a better choice. But we want to convince the people who are listening so they will understand what we're talking about in real, in practical terms, very pragmatic way. The ordinary person who is using electricity at their home and paying electricity bill at the end of the month, that's their concern. They're paying an electricity bill at the end of the month. They want to know how is it going to be in their best interest for us to go that way in Dominica. So let's talk about that a little bit.
All right, was that Dr. Bunker or myself?
Yes, I was asking Dr. Bunker to come in and see if she can help us with some of that. I'll come back to you a little bit later after I talk to Mark.
Absolutely. Happy to. So David mentioned a bit just the fact that solar PV is a proven technology. It's been used around the world, and that has contributed to a lot of the cost declines. So there's a starting point there, right? We're not testing anything or doing a laboratory, seeing what might work. We know solar energy works. We see it around the world. And it can be deployed in many different ways. That's another benefit of it, is the modularity or flexibility. So you can do a large solar array. Maybe you've seen those or seen photos of those. You can do solar on your roof, a much smaller installation. All of and in between, right? And all of these different ways of using solar contribute to a lower cost electricity system overall, because of that payback period that David's mentioning and the overall low cost of generating electricity from solar PV. One thing I'll mention on the technical side, a question that we often hear and grapple with in our work is, where are we going to put all this solar? Is there space to deploy those resources? And what we found, we've been somewhat surprised in our analysis when we've done a geospatial analysis of different islands. So looking at all of the space available, First of all, we find that there's more space than we might think that's out there. But of course, there are important other uses for land, in particular agriculture and tourism. Could be others as well. And so it's not as easy as saying, let's do a map and just cover all of the open space with solar. Of course, that's not necessarily the way to go. But we have been surprised at how much space is available and some solutions for more integrated solar PV as well. One being with the built environment. So I mentioned solar on rooftops. That's common. We see that a lot. You can imagine a solar parking canopy. Those have been deployed around the world as well. In fact, we just visited the one in the Bahamas at the National Stadium. Solar raised up so that cars can park underneath, provides shade, parking area, also just a place to be in the shade, get out of the sun, and use that space that was a parking area to deploy solar as well. So integrating solar in the built environment is one way we've seen it done. And then with agriculture as well. Deploying solar in a way that allows crops that need shade to grow underneath the panels, or that allows space for grazing animals to eat the grass in between the panels, saves on costs. You don't have to cut the grass. You can use the animals for that and use the space in between. So we're seeing in the Caribbean, operating, implemented today, examples of integrating this proven technology of solar PV with other pieces of life, right? With agriculture, with where we live and park and work. And that is part of what's leading to these lower costs and this opportunity to really see a decrease in energy costs.
I wanted us to explore all of that a little bit more as well, because let's talk about the aesthetics a little bit. Because you've seen some things in the Bahamas and some of the islands. How does it look? Because that is one of the concerns. Not just the space you're going to occupy, but how does it look? So can it be done in a way that is aesthetically very pleasing and nice designs, and so that it looks part of the landscape? Because Dominica is a nature island, so it has to be done in a way that it fits into the landscape. Can you see the possibility that can be done here based on what you've seen in other islands?
I can. I will say I am biased because I look at a solar array and find it beautiful myself, but I know that's not true for everyone, and that's okay. And absolutely understand for some islands, the natural landscape is the draw for people who come to visit. But yes, I've started to see, and I think we'll see even more ways that solar PV is designed to fit in with the landscape or fit in with the built environment, or be hidden essentially from view, so that it's not something that people need to look at all the time, but is sited strategically so that it's getting great sun and using that resource, but isn't right out in everybody's face. I think a good example here is the island of Bermuda, which is known for very iconic white rooftops. It's a big part of their design and just the look and feel of the whole island. And as they have started to deploy solar PV on those rooftops, they've been able to do it in a way that still fits with that local design, the local flavor, and how they want their buildings to look. They still have those white rooftops. Some of them just have solar PV integrated into them.
Mark, I don't know how much you've done in terms of comparisons, in terms of cost comparisons between the solar and because you heard some of the numbers that David and Dr. Bentley talking about here. I don't know what you've done in terms of comparing that to geothermal. What is your sense there on that?
Well, I'm not doubting his figures, except that, as Kaithlyn said there, we have to take the environment in which you're going to put these solar panels into account. And as you know, as I just said, Dominica has 9 volcanoes, which means we have more than 9 mountains in Dominica. We also have, I think, probably the highest rainfall in the world, which means we have a lot of cloud cover. And I would see solar as a good thing, and that would be, pretty much a year-round possibility, mostly on the west coast of Dominica, where there is a lot less rainfall, a lot less cloud cover. But then the question comes up about, well, where exactly would you put the solar panels? Because the way Dominica is shaped, there isn't much distance between the seashore and the mountain. it's relatively narrow, especially on the west coast. So, which is where I would say, in terms before we go to, if you say geothermal for local consumption, I would have thought we would have gone towards expanding our hydro capacity. For the same reason that you might say solar is a little bit difficult, the fact that we have these mountains and streams and rivers that are flowing all to the sea, we could simply dam them when necessary and provide electricity from hydro there. We have some experience in running that. For example, on the east coast of Dominica, there is one river comes to mind where it could be done, the White River, which could probably supply all of daily seas down to La Plaine with electricity. Yeah, which would cut out the excessive cost we have to produce electricity in Roseau and transported by wire all the way across the mountains to Delis and La Plaine, and there's nobody in between really. So, and when you get to the east coast, it's very sparsely populated, so that the cost of producing electricity for these people is sky high. And just to say off track there, and one of the expenses of producing electricity in Dominica is the cost of fuel indeed. But as we just said, about 30 to 40% of our electricity consumption is produced by hydro, but that has not, and as David said, the upfront cost in doing solar in his case he was given it there is cost some money, but over a period of time you pay it back and then you get the electricity basically for free. So in our case, we took a substantial loan in the 1990s or thereabout to rebuild and expand the hydro plant. We've since paid back the loan, so essentially we're getting as close to free electricity as possible from our hydro station, except for maintenance and like repair and so on when hurricane comes and smashes things down and so on. So we have that experience, and I think if we, I think somebody mentioned microgrids, were to think of ourselves as having microgrids instead of having one large grid. Although you could link them up at certain places where necessary for, if you have a failure here, then you just pull it off on another generating station. But if we worked in that way to utilize our natural advantage, which is the fact that we have lots of water running down hills and mountains, we could have a substantial amount of electricity produced cheaply by using a hydropower without going to geothermal, because if you're doing geothermal just for local consumption, that is the cost is sky high, which is why the geothermal must be thought of in terms of export. Either you export the electricity itself directly through a cable, or now that the code has been broken, and we are going to build nuclear reactors all over the world that will be essentially working like the sun, using hydrogen as the fuel for fusion, nuclear fusion rather than nuclear fission, which is what we have been doing in nuclear power now, using uranium and so on, which leaves behind radioactive waste. And the expectation is that the world is going to switch over a period of time to almost complete nuclear power using fusion, using what do you call it, hydrogen. Now, right now, most of the hydrogen that's used is used from methane, which is CH4, yeah, which is carbon and hydrogen. That is not a very good way to produce hydrogen, because you then have carbon that is going to be released into the atmosphere, that's going to warm up the earth, etc. So you need to produce the hydrogen, which is the fuel, in a different way. And there is known a different way long time how to get hydrogen using a different method, is to use water. But you need electricity to split the hydrogen from the oxygen so that you have the hydrogen by itself to use as a fuel. But you cannot, it doesn't make sense to use a diesel generator, for example, to split the hydrogen from the oxygen so that you have hydrogen to use as a fuel. So the best solution is to use a renewable source. And the geothermal is a very good renewable source for the reason that it has about 95% availability. Yeah, like it doesn't break down very often. And the techniques and technologies for doing geothermal have been progressive. We might say generation 1.0, we're up to now fourth generation technology to produce geothermal power, which is different. Yeah, it uses a bit of a different technology. But the important thing is, but because Dominica needs a number of things. One is low electricity bills, and secondly, we need to export something to earn money to buy stuff from abroad. Right now, we are relying on tourism to a certain extent, or relied on tourism because it stopped for a couple of years there. And before that, we relied on unprofitable agricultural exports. Yes, so we need to have something to export. And I'm seeing the energy as a good long-term plan for Dominica's economy based on utilizing the geothermal power to produce electricity and using the electricity to produce hydrogen, which is the fuel that's going to be needed for all these hydrogen nuclear power plants that will be built. In fact, the first one is being built in France right now, and they hope to have it operational like 2030 or so. And the expectation is that after that, when they've got all the kinks in the engineering worked out, that it will spread like wildfire across the earth, because the hydrogen plant, the fusion plant, essentially will be an artificial sun. We will be creating on earth here, will not produce radioactive waste, at least not to the same extent. It will be very little, and the radioactive waste will decay in a relatively short period of time, even so far as there is some of that.
So, Mark, that means we're going to have to produce cars that operate on hydrogen, right?
Yes, I think if for us, hydrogen and the geothermal thing are important for two reasons. One, for driving down our cost of electricity, and two, very important, we must eat something. And we must drive a car, etc., etc. We don't make cars in Dominica, so we have to import them. So we have to have foreign exchange to be able to import them. So if we only get foreign exchange if we export something to somebody abroad. And I think energy is a thing that will always be in demand. It always has been in demand. And the reason that the Saudi Arabians and essentially Russians are holding the world to ransom is because they control such a large portion of the energy that the world still uses. But my expectation is that over a period of time, say by 2050 or thereabouts, that at least half of the energy in the world will be produced by nuclear fusion using hydrogen as the basic fuel.
All right. So David, we've come full circle here now in the first round of discussions, right? And we've seen where it seems to me there's room in the inn for different approaches to this, and using different resources, whatever you have in the islands. We're talking different islands. I mean, not all the islands have these mountains. Not all the islands have the geothermal energy. They don't all have, So obviously, solar is an option. As Mark was saying, our West Coast lends itself to solar. Maybe the East Coast not so much. Maybe the East Coast might lend itself to wind, Mark, for example.
Yes, yeah.
Right? That's Atlantic side. You have a lot more wind there.
Yeah.
The West Coast might lend itself to solar. And yes, you can have geothermal, but I get a sense that the geothermal can
But
have
hydro, you mustn't forget the hydro. We
no.
have a hydro potential which we
Yes,
haven't exploited yet.
yes, that's correct. I mean, we have some experience in hydro as well. I mean, so that's good. But David, let's come back to solar because we want to really explore solar and the benefits of going solar and why we really should look seriously at solar. Let's talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, this is great discussion because all of the points that McCathy spoke to earlier, actually, they're all solid, valid points. This is not a solar or nothing type of conversation. This is all of the above conversation, and we like to approach things like at the portfolio level, where we say, okay, here are the combination of things and pathways that can be taken. So doesn't have to be one or the other, or it can be both. And what matters though is we have a limited amount of resources to invest, right? And we all are after the same goal, which is to come off of the carbon, fossil fuel, diesel train. And we have to get off because it's just too expensive for us to continue down that road. So we all are in agreement there. I think where we are right now today is to say, here is an opportunity before us that has a very rapid payback period. And the investment we make today can reduce our cost in 2 to 3 years. What happens after that is all the savings that we have or that we'll receive from making that investment, we can apply that to other forms of sources of energy. And we have, in the context of geothermal and even hydro, we have what would be considered more base load energy. All right. So if we say, I know Dominica has a high percentage of hydro, but let's just assume we're working with a 0 to 100 system just for easy math. If we say here's where we are today, and we have just a small percentage today, we need to make a rapid transition to get 100% of our system off of diesel onto solar or renewable energies of some sort. We can make a big investment today, which will have rapid payback in solar, and still make the investment in geothermal that gives us the long-term stability that we need in the energy system. So geothermal could be the base load, it could be the export, it could even be a source of transportation, fuel and transportation, right? I see those more as longer term decisions. Let's say, even if we say in the context of 5 years from now, or 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, right? Because even if you do have a successful find in terms of the geothermal exploration, you still have to have time to develop the plant and do the construction and get it exported and so forth. So that is something that's going to take some time. It's much more complicated than something that is proven, that's scalable, meaning we can start from 1 kilowatt on a rooftop to 50 megawatts in a utility scale. All right. In terms of the land resource, we know that's a little trickier for Dominica with the mountains and shadows and different things like that, and availability of flat land. But we found that in the context of Bermuda, where there's very, very limited available land resources, through using the built infrastructure, land, homes, rooftops, office buildings, and so forth, they've been able to concentrate a significant amount of solar potential just from rooftops alone. And by doing it in an aggregated way, in terms of let's not do one rooftop at a time, you can reduce the cost by 50% and make it very competitive and get to that 10 cents per kilowatt hour that I was talking about earlier that we can get throughout the region, right? And you can combine that with some land utility scale initiatives that will get you to 2 megawatts or 3 megawatts or even 4 megawatts, which is being done or explored in St. Lucia, Grenada, and some of the other places. I know they're a little larger in size, but there is potential. And let's say that only gets us to 50% of where we need to be. That's still a big step in the right direction, and we still have a significant amount of capacity left for geothermal, wind, or even hydro that we can then utilize that as base load, which allows you to grow more solar in the future, because now you have a system that has the sort of the base load production at a constant level throughout the year. And whatever excess you have, by the way, you get to export and bring in more revenues to the island. So you can export some of the solar, you can export none, you can export all the geothermal. There's so many opportunities here. So it makes it for a very exciting discussion because it's all about solutions, and all of them will bring cost savings, and all of them will improve the livelihood of everyone in Dominica.
Let's talk about some numbers. Dr. You can jump in anytime, and Mark, you can jump in anytime. Let's just crunch some numbers and let's get a conversation going for real. If, let us say, we have to take a decision, I'm a policymaker and I want to take a decision, 25% of my energy, I want to say, let's consider 25% on the West Coast coming from solar. What kind of investment might I have to make? Because I'll tell you why I say so. Why I ask that question is because in Dominica, we've already spent, Mark, I believe, something like between 80 to $100 million on geothermal. At least 80, I'm aware of, on geothermal.
Yeah, it's somewhere in that region, yes.
Yes, we've spent that. We don't have any electricity generated from that yet. I want to get
although I would say a good bit of that was grant money.
Yes,
yeah, but
well,
it's still been spent, yes.
Yes, but the point is that if you had to now, say, do a geothermal plan going for real, you would have to write off all of that, because if you had to incorporate that into your cost, it's going to make the unit cost very expensive. So you'd have to sort of write that off and say, okay, this is no longer part of the cost, and let's just start from scratch, right? But I wanted to ask that because, I mean, is it feasible for us to look at, say, all right, say 25% of it, what kind of investment might we run into? I don't know what your thoughts on that, David?
Yeah, so there are two parts of the investment. There is the upfront solar equipment, panels, infrastructure for mountain equipment and so forth, and all of the ancillary stuff that comes with that, your inverters and transformers to interconnect with the grid. And so with all of that said, you're talking roughly, say roughly about $1.50 per watt, $1 US 50 per watt, which, so translate that, if we needed to go to 10 megawatts of solar, all right, we're talking about roughly 15 million US dollars. Okay, that's the first part of the investment. Then at that scale, because we'd be roughly 50% of the 20 megawatts for Dominica, all right, then we'd be talking about some integration of batteries. And that could happen at various parts of the grid or with the solar farm itself. Now, with that investment in batteries, you'd probably add roughly another, let's say to be safe, $1 per watt. So we're going to add like another, say, $10 million to that roughly. Okay, so let's say it's going to be about $25 million for that investment. That's what we're talking about. I think that gets us to somewhere around 10, maybe 12 cents with the batteries per kilowatt hour. which is still a significant savings below the cost today. So we'd still have a rather fast payback, and that means that, you know, after about 3 to 5 years, we're talking about continued, basically, you know, returns on investment multiple times.
Yeah, well, Dr. Dr. Bonker, I want to come to you now because I think it's important for us to look at these things a little bit more closely now, because we come into the real nitty-gritty. I mean, we're doing this for a purpose. At some point in time, the region has to take some decisions. And we as a country have to take some decisions. Right here in Dominica, we have options. And certainly from the numbers that David is crunching here, it looks like that's an option to consider. And like I said, if you juxtapose that against what I've said we've spent already, maybe grant funds and so on. Some of it may be grant fund, but that's a lot of money that's been spent already. We still have not generated, electricity from that, right? No energy has come from that yet, right? It's probably there, ready to go, but nothing has come out yet. So your thoughts on some of that?
Absolutely. I think you're right. It's time to make a decision. As we've been discussing, though, that decision doesn't have to be pick one technology and only pursue that and leave the others behind. There's certainly room for a mix, and what we've seen is a mix of resources providing the most benefit in terms of reducing costs, what we're focusing on today, but in terms of other priorities too, like resilience. If an island is relying on one source for electricity, that's not very resilient, right? If there's, hopefully not, but another large hurricane, another global economic shock like the pandemic, anything that causes a big shock to the system, and an island's relying fully on diesel. We know Dominica doesn't. There's quite a bit of hydro as well. But if there's an issue with fuel supply, that's a big issue. If you are relying 100% on solar power, there could be issues with that, with the sun being available, or issues with that system. So having a mix of different resources can increase the overall resilience of the system, as well as bringing down costs, the focus of our discussion tonight. And so what David is outlining in terms of the cost matches with the technical analysis we've done as well for various islands, where we look at, again, the mix of resources, not one versus the other, but what are some mixes that could be pursued. And when we've looked at other islands with geothermal potential, we see solar pairing well with geothermal, just as one example. Other resources pair well together too, but geothermal being able to provide that more consistent base load, solar supporting during the day, supporting the peak needs for electricity tend to happen during the day when solar is available. Bringing in battery storage too can lend to flexibility between them. They can work really well together. As you mentioned, geothermal takes a lot of time. Even if everything goes well, hopefully it does in any project that's pursued, it just takes time. Solar can be deployed much more quickly, and so there's no reason to wait. As David has outlined, there's an opportunity right now today to make a decision to pursue some solar projects, start seeing benefit from those right away, see their very soon payback period, and in doing that, not prevent other technologies from being used in the future, not stop you from continuing to pursue geothermal or hydro or wind or anything else in the mix. It's, solar's proven, the cost is low right now. It's a great opportunity now to be part of an overall transition with a mix of resources that's going to meet local priorities.
Yes, clearly solar is proven. Mark, your thoughts on all of the combinations, because you see, if you've seen what solar can do, you've seen what wind can do, because I know there are a couple of windmills that were put up in Dominica. I'm not sure if any of them are still working. I know they've worked at one time or the other. And you've seen what geothermal can do. You had some experience looking at that. What are your thoughts, Matt? What's coming into your head as you think about all of this going forward for Dominica? Not only looking at the...
Well,
I would say, I would say not only...
I would say I'm in general agreement with Kaithlyn. Yeah. You can use bunker if you will. As one of the sources of energy. So what I was saying is, she identified an interesting, well, I don't say call it a problem, an interesting dimension of our dilemma on these small islands. That being the fact that if we rely too heavily or exclusively on one source of energy and something goes wrong, then suddenly we have no energy. So it's a wise idea in our case because we have the possibility of having multiple sources of energy just for local consumption that we explore each of them. So which is why I'm saying uh, if I were in the decision making position now, I would push to have some hydro plants set up on our rivers, particularly on the east coast of Dominica. Yeah. And we, Wasri and myself and so on, actually took some wind measurements at Woodford Hill Estate for about 6 months because we intended to put up a wind farm at that area there. However, as Miss Bunker, or Dr. Bunker rather, has told us, um, there are different uses for land. And the place we were hoping to put up these windmills has now been allocated to building an airport. So at that location, any case, that's out of the question to put up windmills there now. So there are other places, of course, we can put windmills. One of the interesting places we could put windmills actually would be relatively high up on some of the mountain slopes because the wind there is more constant and of greater velocity. So we could explore different places where we could put up have wind as one of the sources of energy. We could also do a heat exchange thing in the ocean because Dominica happens to have just as the land is mountainous with valleys. We also happen to have a similar thing in our sea. We have virtually no reefs around Dominica. So we know that the technology exists already to use the difference in temperature between water that's deep down and water that's closer up to have a heat exchange mechanism to produce energy and then you to use that heat to generate electricity. So we have a lot of possibilities that we should explore indeed, yes, for local consumption. But I think as part of our overall economic development strategy, we should seriously consider getting into the geothermal in a large scale. And what I'm saying, we already have the studies done, the test drillings done at the major site that has been identified for now. Although that site has been identified on the basis of the old technology where you drill a hole down and you get the steam itself to come up and spin the turbine. But there are other technologies that don't require you to have the same geological structure for you to get the geothermal power. Yeah, which well, no point talking about what they are, but there are other ways that you can get geothermal power without having the same original technique that was used in Italy in 1904. So there are ways and means of doing that practically everywhere in Dominica.
I want to come back to you, David, because you see, we want to explore. You see, what we need to do is, if we're going to appeal, and if people are listening, I hope some of our policymakers are listening, for some possibly investors are listening, and I know the people of Domlec are listening. Domlec is the sole electricity company here, as you know. The government of Dominica recently bought the controlling shares in Domlec. Emera used to have it through the Barbados Telecom, Barbados Electricity Corporation, but Emera has not sold out their shares to the government of Dominica. I'm not sure so at this point whether it's a great decision or not. I mean, from a point of view of an investment, a financial, whatever the considerations. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how is that going to turn out. I know that the private sector usually is better equipped to handle those kind of things than the public sector. I find that the private sector is more concerned about the bottom line. But at the same time, there is something called the people's interests, the consumers, right? And I'm sure somebody's looking at that. Somebody else is looking at the investment possibilities. Because you spend money, you want to have investments that could, as Mark is saying, you need to go to the bigger picture. If you look at geothermal, what can you produce to export, right? Beyond what you're consuming. Obviously, that is where you want to go because you know the foreign earnings is what you need, right? To keep your economy going. But David, if we look at these three components or four components, it's obvious to me and to anybody who's listening and watching what's going on in the world that solar is very popular. It's proven, it's happening now, and people are making use of it, and you have the numbers, you have the costs. What else can you add to the conversation to make it clear that we ought to consider solar as at least one component of the mix that we're talking about in going into renewables? Let's get the arguments out there why we should do it, and we talk about the batteries a little bit more because you see, yeah, you see this battery technology is very important because even those cars are they're making these electric cars now, and you have to refuel every 3 hours now, but they need to make a battery that you can drive from Canada to New York in 8 hours and refuel maybe not just once.
Yeah, yeah. And, it's a good point, and it. Let me back up a little bit. And from the time you mentioned Dominic and Dominica as a whole, I always reflect on 2017, which was a rough year for us all in the utility business, particularly us in the Eastern Caribbean. When we got hit with Irma, we were devastated. And Dominic was the first utility to send down a crew to help us out in Anguilla. And we were so grateful. We were so excited. We had, everybody was so excited. They were going out to see the Dominic crews, climbing the poles and just helping us because we were so, our morale was down the drain. So it was a great uplift for us. And no sooner than, I think less than 10 days later, Hurricane Maria came through. And I remember having to spend time that evening with the Dominic crew who was so concerned about their family members and how would they get back to Dominica, whether their family members had, all these WhatsApp messages were coming out and voice notes were coming out. And it was a really scary and painful time for us. So I always have to take a moment to reflect and remember that experience. We got the crews back along with working closely with Amara at the time to get the crews back to Dominica. But we were so appreciative of all the sacrifice that they made. And, as it turned out, leaving their families at home at risk during Hurricane Maria. So thank you, Dominica. Thank you, Dominic. Now that's out of the way, I must say, when it comes to the solar, the renewable energy transition and the experience around that, there are multiple pathways. And generally, we try to, create an open to all sort of approach to doing things because everything is local, right? The experience in Dominica is different from the experience in Anguilla, different resources. This, though, certainly personally, and I do represent RMI also, but from a personal level, like just living in the islands and understanding the dynamics, being a former CEO of the utility in Anguilla, and knowing how these numbers are affected and impacted by the decisions we make, I can't say that I am not pushing one over the other right now because the reality is right there before me. The facts are right there before me. And we can talk about the experiences we've had in Ragged Island, which was hit by Hurricane Irma, that is now rebuilt a Hurricane Category 5 resilient solar farm that takes them off of the grid 90% off of diesel 90% of the time and is providing energy to the grid day in, day out, which they've avoided fuel imports for months at a time. Okay. And that's a solar and battery system that's feeding a grid. So the reason why I say that is because the technology is proven. Just across from St. Martin, across from Angola, is Statia. They've advanced to 50%, and they're going towards a 90% target. They're considering wind and solar, but they're making the investments in solar because they know that one, the studies and the level of investment and technical expertise is a lot less, and it's a proven technology, and it's working today for them combined with batteries, and they can shut off their systems for sometimes a full day, daylight during the day, and run on diesel at night. So like this is working in Montserrat. They're up to 45, 50% at peak. And they're also using battery and solar technology. St. Kitts is going 35 megawatts of solar. I think about 35 or 40 megawatts of battery. They just broke ground on that system. So we are moving in that direction because that's a very practical, workable. It's not as technologically challenging as it were back in 2015. Anglic, we did a 1 megawatt solar farm without batteries in 2015 on a 15 megawatt grid. So with that said, we know that we can make some upfront investments without battery that can survive without any challenges to the grid. At a certain level, but it's 10%, and it depends on the grid. There's some grid studies and analyses that has to happen and where it's located on the grid. 20%, you can go as far as maybe 20% on some grids and have little or no impact. After that, you start getting into, we need to integrate some battery storage to mitigate the challenges that the grid may face. You may need to do it before that. But either way, the solutions are very practical, very easy. And just like in solar, the cost of battery storage has decreased tremendously. And that's because of what you spoke to a little bit earlier. The vehicles, the auto industry are basically saying, making pronouncements by 2025, by 2030 for sure, there'll almost be zero automakers who are using internal combustion gasoline engines. Okay, so everyone will be transitioning. That provides the scale and has provided the scale necessary to drive down cost in battery storage. We will benefit tremendously from that. But here's the thing, we won't have a choice because we don't produce automobiles in the region. So when those automobiles start coming to the region, because we can't find anything else, we must have a solution for electricity, because that will drive up electricity costs or electricity demand by 50 and maybe 100% in some cases. And we have to have a solution for that. And it can't be fossil fuels, because we know the only way fossil fuels will go is up in cost. And there's a limited resource. It's a limited resource, meaning you can look at any country that's producing oil today, and they can tell you roughly how many years of oil reserves they have left. So we know as those reserves go down, the cost will go up. So for us, it's a no-win situation to stay on fossil fuels. And given the dynamics today, I explained the numbers earlier, we can drive down costs tremendously, and the payback will be so short that it gives us an opportunity to invest in many more things going forward.
Yes, I'm sure that Guyana and Suriname may not necessarily agree with us because they just found all this oil there. So they may have a few years to go still. But I wanted to take some calls. Lambi, I wanted to go over to you, and let's take a little ad break. Maybe we can take a few calls, and then when we come back, we look at the big picture again, because clearly we have to make some choices, because otherwise the choices will be made for us. The way the world is going, I mean, it's obvious that we really do not have much of a choice in the matter. So we're going to have to take some decisions about renewable energy. So we have to make some practical decisions. Lambi, let's go over to you. I take some calls, give the folks the numbers.
Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc. Nidcliff, uniting our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean Nature Islanders and friends of Dominica at home and abroad, coming together to help preserve the integrity of Dominica's democracy, human rights, and civil liberties, ensuring free, fair, and competitive elections on a level playing field within a system that guarantees freedom of expression, belief and association, respect for the inalienable rights of individuals and minorities, respect for the rule of law, for free communications media, and free from psychological, mental, and physical abuse of women, minors, the elderly, and young men. State lands are secretly being sold to political acolytes and shady foreigners. CBI hotels are sprouting up all over Dominica. Persons are becoming rich overnight. Public projects are awarded to foreigners and cronies without public tender, and the public is forced to pay in excess of $65,000 a month to rent and maintain a palace for a prime minister. In spite of this obscene display of wealth, seemingly generated by illegal means, Dominicans still live under tarpaulins and are deprived of a basic stimulus package in a debilitating pandemic. Monies donated by the World Health Organization to alleviate suffering seem to be diverted and squandered. Political allegiance is now a requirement for public assistance, while those who exercise their freedom of speech are victimized and ostracized. Nidcliff, support our radiothon, fundraising events, subscriptions, GoFundMe, and other initiatives to help raise funds to support a legal challenge against the siphoning of public funds from the Consolidated Fund and other initiatives and actions. Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc. Nidcliff, working to help unify and build Dominica and our Afro-Caribbean and Kalinago brothers and sisters at home and abroad. Nidcliff, fighting to save our Nature Island Nature.
The Global View and Queue, taking your calls right now. The numbers are as follows: 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. These are all local numbers. And the international number is 305-432-9624. Let me run those numbers one more time. 449-3095-9697, 616-4257, 305-432-9624, and we're standing by for your calls.
Lambi, if you don't have any calls yet, while you're waiting for the calls, let me just acknowledge some of the fine folks on Facebook that are with us here tonight. I can see Michael Alexis is here. Big up to Michael Alexis and Juanita Prince. And I can see David Joseph. How are you doing, David? And Penny Shirley. Lots of folks already with us on Facebook. We'll acknowledge some of your comments a little later on. But I wanted to go back before, as Lambi is waiting for his calls, let people settle on and call. I'm going to go over to Dr. Bunker. Because, certainly you can see we're already coming down to what it is that we're really trying to achieve, the solutions, right? We're talking solutions. We can see some of the experiences in some of the countries. The terrains are different by and large in some places, so there are different choices. Some of the islands don't have as much water as others. Dominica has water. Dominica has rivers. Dominica has mountains. Dominica has a lot of wind on the Atlantic side and a lot of sunshine on the west coast. So obviously, it seems to me that a combination of things may be the solution for us in Dominica. Clearly, wind is doing something, some places, but solar is very well established, obviously. And with the technology that we've seen evolving all the time, the battery technology can only get better, and the whole solar technology can only improve. It seems to me that the cost could easily come down. And if you compare the cost, not only to what it is now, but with what the other costs of fossil fuel is going to be in the future, obviously the cost of solar looks like it's going to be much lower, relatively speaking. So, in terms of making a choice, You're looking at cost competitiveness. Solar looks like it's quite a stable option to look at. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. And the cost stability is a really great point. David mentioned there's been some fluctuation recently in solar prices given global supply chain challenges, right? The price of solar coming back up a little bit, but in general, it's going to, maintain, continue to come down, be relatively stable. Not only are fuel costs likely to remain high, there's likely to be a lot of volatility there. Maybe there will be another drop in fuel prices, but then another increase. If we look at any historical chart of fuel prices, it's up and down and unpredictable, right? Whereas solar is consistent, coming down, stable. So besides the opportunity to lower cost significantly, there's an opportunity to be much more predictable in what energy is going to cost when we rely on locally installed solar using the sun versus imported fuels where that cost is uncertain. We don't know what it's going to do. We think it's likely to stay high, but is also likely to be very very volatile in terms of price going up and down over time.
But Mark, as we look at the cost of fuel today, I mean, look at what's happening in the United States and around the world. I mean, this war in Ukraine. Look at the kind of impact it's having on globally, on the cost of fuel. I mean, Joe Biden now is having nightmares over this thing, because in this cost of he doesn't know what to do about it. He's now thinking of doing this was it tax holiday, thinking of removing that for a while, and to see if that will help. That might reduce the cost of fuel at the pumps by 18 cents or thereabouts. Yes, it might make a difference. I'm not sure how significant that difference would be. If you look at the price of the gas per gallon, let us say a year ago compared to what it is today, and most people now are looking at what they can afford right now, and it is just really very, very difficult for many households and many people who are commuting. So, Mark, we're looking at these options here, and it seems to me, yes, solar is obviously an option to look at.
Sure.
I like the fact, Mark, that you're looking beyond just the generation of a production of electricity from geothermal, but you're looking at generating something beyond there, where the geothermal energy itself that is produced can be used to create another product, which could become a bigger product that the world wants, if it can be produced effectively, hydrogen.
Yes, if it can be, yes. Well, that's the whole point about the large scale geothermal project. Was the expectation when the project that is now, if you like, ongoing, when it started, it was expected to produce eventually 120 megawatts, but that's a small portion of what all of Dominica could produce. So, and if we can have the energy, to make a somewhat simplistic analogy, in Saudi Arabia, before they discovered, so to speak, oil, people were basically just riding around on camels. Now, pretty much everybody in Saudi Arabia rides around in a Mercedes Benz because they have energy, and they have sufficient energy to control and determine the price of energy worldwide. Yes, and part of the reason why the price of gasoline and so on is so high is because Saudi Arabia refuses to, if you like, take a stand against Russia by pumping more oil to bring the price down. So they, if you like, in a sense, secretly supporting Russia in their action in the war. Because when the price of oil stays up, and the Saudi Arabians, who are the largest producers of oil, especially sweet oil, um, do not pump more oil, then the Russians, their oil prices go up. And even if they're selling, you might see slightly less to Europe because some European countries are trying to reduce their consumption of Russian oil. The fact that the price has gone up means they gobble up a lot of money. Yeah, so the whole question of energy, and this is the second time we're having this kind of economic situation where we have what the term what was termed coined in the 70s, stagflation, where we have significant inflation while the economy is not growing and unemployment is relatively high. And wages, in particular, are not rising, but the price of everything else is rising. First time that happened in the 1970s, and it was again when about oil, energy. That's when the Arabs deployed what they call the oil weapon and reduced the supply of oil considerably so that the prices shot through the roof. And then that's when we had the first discussion about we must reduce the amount of energy that we use, especially in the United States. Everybody was told to buy a smaller car, etc. And people did buy smaller cars, in the whole expectation of saving on energy. And eventually, of course, Saudi Arabia came back on and they started pumping oil, and the Americans convinced them that they ought to, and they agreed, and the price of oil came very low. And I remember when we were doing our expansion of the geothermal, not the geothermal, the hydro plant, there was a discussion in Dominica as to whether we should actually do the hydro plant because the price of diesel was so cheap. Not, luckily, the government didn't follow that advice and they decided to continue to do the hydro project because eventually the price of oil stopped being so cheap and hydro is now pretty much free. The electricity from hydro is free. So the need of the world for energy is, if you like, constant and increasing because to produce anything you need energy, and the fact that the world is, if you like, in a mechanized means that we need energy for machines that produce machines, and then we need machines, energy for machines that produce things that people consume, and we need energy for machines that carry things from one place to the other. So the amount of energy needed for mechanical, if you like, work is constantly increasing, especially if we want to keep on increasing our gross domestic product and the amount of stuff we produce. We must have a constantly increasing amount of energy. Of course, engineers like Dr. Bunker is working very hard to to increase the efficiency of machines so that they need less energy to do the same work they used to do before. But I tell my friend who calls me up every month from Dublin to ask me about my when I'm paying my bill and so on. I remind her that she's the person best placed in Dominica to
Mark,
tell us how.
can I interrupt you one sec, Mark? I think Lambi's getting his telephone thing under control.
Okay,
Lamb, you
all
want to
right.
take a call? Come
Yes.
right back.
Caller, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add another angle. I really want to get talk too much about the various type of renewable energy, which Dominica have a whole lot of from geothermal, hydro, wind, solar, and actually in the hydro, not only that we could produce hydro, but also we could use some of the hydro dams to for irrigation, especially in the current period. But the part I think that is missing there is that energy not used is energy that you don't have to produce. You don't have to produce. For instance, a lot of our buildings are inefficient. Are just totally inefficient, and they're using much more power than they need. Our windows are not the correct type of windows, so they are not properly ventilated. So some of our roofs, the heat is coming directly from the sun, heating up the inside of the building. So there are a number of things that we could do to make the building more efficient. And then briefly on the question of attire. In this day and age, when we're talking about climate emergency or the climate crisis, we still wearing three-piece suit in that hot sun. I mean, that's crazy. So we have to start seriously thinking that we talk about energy efficiency and the attire that we use in the Caribbean. We cannot continue doing what we're doing there and think that we are serious, because at the end of the climate change will affect us much more and much earlier than the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, caller. Appreciate it.
Great contribution. Obviously, I mean, we have not really mentioned in the term climate change and climate, but I mean, obviously, that's making a big impact on the world. And this is part of the reasons why we're looking at renewable. And so clearly this is a case for it. So Mark, let me just go back to you because I think you were completing the point there. Because what I get a sense though, Mark, is that we're being instructed really by all of what we're saying there that we need to reduce our dependence on fossils. Clearly, that's where the world is going. It's not good for our carbon footprint. It's not good for our health. It is not good for our production of our agriculture and all of that thing. We don't want to get all these chemicals in there. So I think the renewable options we're looking at, it's a good way. It's a good thing that we are doing this now. And but I agree that the geothermal that you're talking about, it has its place.
Mhm.
I would really like to see it being developed in a very serious way, that it can go beyond just generating a certain percentage of our electric for consumption, because I'm not sure that the French will still be interested, for example, like the closest people to us, they used to be interested in actually investing in moving this thing across. So I'm not sure they still are. So it means I'm not sure it's worth our while to think about getting it to them. It probably is not cost effective for us to do that. The price will be too high by the time we get to sell them. So it seems to me that we may have to look beyond that and say, okay, so we generate a certain amount of that for consumption, and a lot of what we generate, electricity, will be used to create some other product which we could sell, which I think you're suggesting
Hydrogen.
hydrogen could be one of those products. Yeah.
Right. Well, precisely that, because as I said sometime when we started the back of the hand calculation we had made, and the last caller was my colleague there, Mr. Douglas, by the way, that we had made back in 2002. There we were talking about like $100 million for the cabling. However, now that the production of energy from hydrogen using fusion technique, yes, is finally been broken, and they building the first reactor, I said, in France, that will prove the point that we can produce it on fairly large scale for to replace the fission reactors. That means that the need for us to send the electricity itself directly to Guadeloupe or Martinique in a cable no longer is necessary, because if they have the hydrogen reactor in Martinique, one suitable for their size, of course, and one or more in Guadeloupe, then we send them not electricity in a cable, we send them hydrogen in a boat. You know, just like we import cooking gas, for example, from Trinidad, Venezuela in a boat. Then we send them hydrogen, which is a gas, in a boat, and they would put it into their reactor and have their electricity like that. So what we have to always be conscious of is what's going to come. We mustn't be stuck with what has happened before, because the fact that both at MIT and Oxford, more or less simultaneously, they cracked the code to allow one unit of energy to create diffusion to produce 3 or more units of energy output. That because the producing energy from hydrogen is a thing that's been known a very long time ago, but it was a question of energy in and energy out. Yes, because we know hydrogen bomb, makes a pretty loud noise and destroys lots of things. So that's known that you can actually get energy out of hydrogen long time. The question was to do it in a controlled way and to make sure that the energy you're using to create diffusion is not more than the energy you're getting out. And now that we might say in the lab, cracked the code, so we know how to do it, so that you put one energy unit of energy in and you get 2 or 3 or 4, whatever, out, then that makes fusion energy on a large scale feasible. And that, from all what I've been reading, seems to be the way our energies will be supplied from, say, starting 2040 going into 2050. It's not like immediate, but that's where it will be in the future, because our estimation for the cost of the cabling would mean that we'll have to send electricity through this cable for quite a number of years before we recover the cost of the cabling. So it would not probably be worthwhile to send the electricity itself directly to Martinique or Guadeloupe as electricity. When there's an alternative, which they probably will set up in Martinique and Guadeloupe, to have small hydrogen fueled power plants, nuclear power plants. So we're going to send them the fuel for the nuclear plants.
So David, let's come back to you now. Because time has a way of just running by. So it's now already almost 9:30. I know Dr. Bonka it's no problem for her because she has a lot of daylight still with her. But neck of the woods, it's getting by. So, but obviously your interest, your primary interest I know that you're interested in renewable. I think you can appreciate all the arguments that we're making. David, let me just go take a call from Lambi before I come back to you. Lambi, take a call, Lambi.
Yes, the caller on the overseas line. It's your turn to go ahead with your call.
Greetings, gentlemen.
Hello.
Do you guys really expect the one-man rogue regime to take up any of the things that you guys are saying? Don't you guys have realized that these guys are running the island as gamblers and drug dealers?
That's it, caller. Thanks a lot for your contribution. Appreciate. David, I was going back to you to let's look at this again, because obviously your area of focus is solar, but I don't think there's any argument really. There's no argument that can be made against solar. It's established. There's people here have solar panels on their homes, some of them right here. There's a company, Marino Enterprises, they were engaged in solar for quite some time. And so solar is happening. The technology is there. You can price it because the cost is there. What a disadvantage that we can think of, that we should not be looking at a certain percentage of our mix in solar. I don't see any disadvantage, do you? And what are the real major advantages you want to recommend to some small island developing states? Don't put all your eggs in one basket, obviously, because of all the external shocks that we sometimes subject to, and the natural disasters and all that, climatology and all of that. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. So if we're going to make a case, make the case for solar.
Yeah, it is a bit confusing to me. I was on the other side of this debate 10 years ago. Not that I was discouraging solar, but there weren't as many advantages that you could lock into right away, right? But in the last 10 years, so much has happened, and the biggest thing is the decreases in cost. But there's been such advancements in efficiency of solar. There's been such advancements in battery technology that helps it to be, easily integrated into any grid across the world. Many, as I mentioned, many islands in the Caribbean region are actually making big strides and transitioning most of their production to solar today. I know it's still, it's a little, sometimes it seems out of reach to us because of the upfront investment that needs to happen. Not because the investment is so big, it's because we're already invested in a system that's based on diesel fossil fuel. We already have the gensets that we've invested in. Those are 30-year assets. We already have the market mechanisms and transportation systems for fuel delivery, and we have relationships and contracts that exist already. But with all that said, if we were talking about a transition that had even little benefits, we could say, okay, well, maybe there's some reason for hesitation. But right now, and even 6 months ago, the dynamics of fuel today is almost double what it was a year ago. Okay, so the argument is there, and I think everybody's convinced because we're all paying those prices both in our electricity bills and at the pump. Okay, so we can see that evidence for ourselves. Where we are not quite convinced is whether or not we should come up with roughly the $25 million to make that 50% transition happen. Okay, and then it's how are we going to come up with that $25 million? All right. So those are the types of things that we spend a lot of energy and time trying to solve. Those are the types of problems we really go after at RMI. And we work with Caribbean Islands not only in terms of the technical aspects of a transition, and like Kaithlyn described, the planning aspects and developing the transition plans and saying what resources we should go after optimally. But we also look at opportunities for sort of financing these systems. Okay, so one of the new programs that we've launched in the region is called Climate Finance Access Network, and it's CFAN for short. And essentially, it's designed, and we're launching the Caribbean, the Caribbean cohort, I believe, this summer. And basically, what that's designed to do is to bring resources to the region. We're going to be basically hiring persons in the region to go after climate finance and bring those resources to the region. So we know that's a challenge. We're going to try and help sort of bring a solution to the table. There are many other programs that we have ongoing in terms of capacity building. We have a program called the Energy Transition Academy, and we're launching our full-fledged Caribbean. We did a pilot in the Caribbean starting in January that just ended, and we're now launching the full program that will be basically developing people and capacity, human capacity around the energy transition. And we're hoping to have at least 40 people that, you know, we'll be working closely with, training and developing to help bring the human resource that's needed to make the transition happen. So we know there are many little challenges that we face in the region. But let's go back to the finance one for a second. We know we have the monies to make it happen, okay? Because we spend easily, by far, the equivalent in any 1 year on purchasing fuel. And that purchase is financed through electricity bills. Okay, so we know we have the means to actually pay the cost to make the transition happen. And like I said, if we can do this and make it happen in 3 years, or the payback period in 3 years, okay, let's say we need a bridge through a loan, all right, and that could come through the combination of loan, grants, and blended finance, and that's a new term in climate finance. Let's say we come up with some blended finance opportunity, a combination of loans, grants, and private investment to make this happen. That gives us the bridge. That gives us the 25 million upfront and a means to repay that. Okay, whether it's a loan that we have to repay over 5 years or 10 years, whether it's an investment where we have to repay a percentage to a private investor over the period of time. All right. Whatever it may be, remember I said the payback is roughly 3 years. Even if we add in the cost of debt, the cost of an outright loan, or the cost of some kind of payback, we're talking about a tremendous amount of savings on top of all of that. All right. So even if we move the 3 years to 4 years, we're still talking about a significant amount of savings. So we have so much room and so much opportunity. So the concerns about any upfront cash that we have to expend in order to make this transition happen shouldn't really concern us too deeply, because the payback is so tremendous that we can pay a private investor, we can pay loans, and we can do all of that. Remember, the payback period is about 3 years. We can stretch that to 4 years, considering we have to do all these other things, and still pay back 100%. And after that, we still have a 20-year asset And actually, in reality, it's more like a 25-year asset. So for the next 20 years, we have continuous returns on that investment that we make today. So whatever the challenges are, I'm hoping that we've sort of addressed them and demonstrated that there is a pathway to make this happen. And we're always open to continuing this discussion. I know we had limited time tonight, but we're always open to continuing this discussion. If anyone has questions, RMI is an open book. We're independent, we're nonprofit, we're not vested in this, other than to say we're champions for the climate, for climate change, and we see the means of doing that is through the energy transition.
Yes, and Lambi, I think, let me go. I know you're holding a couple of calls, Lambi. You want to take a call?
Yes, caller, are you still there? Please go ahead.
Good evening, Dominica.
Good
We
evening.
have a prime minister. And I know most of the panelists is older than him. You don't think at his age that he should be excited about renewable energy? At his age, not too long before Obama, Labour Party came in power. And when Obama took power, Obama really put effort into renewable energy. You think for a group of young people, they would not have been excited. If I were to ask the government, how many vehicles they have now running on electricity or on current, I don't believe the government have no vehicle that they could use as an example going forward for renewable energy. And yet still we are boasting to the world that we want Dominica to be green nature island of the Caribbean or nature island of the world. We have a government that's 22 years in power. The debt of the country is over 1 billion and more. Yet still we don't even have a proper energy structure. How much more is going to take us by the time they try to better what we have? God bless Dominica. Thank you.
And thanks a lot. Point well taken. If you have, let me just go ahead back to David then, because the caller made a point. Have you had an opportunity to engage with Domlek or any persons in the government to get a chance to discuss the possibility of solar on the scale that we're talking about?
No, we have not as yet. We are now doing a across the board Caribbean launch in terms of getting the message out. But we welcome to have a discussion. I have very good friends at Domlek, so we can always approach them and have that discussion. We always welcome that discussion with the government at any time. We have there are a number of islands that we focus in the region. We haven't had the opportunity to work in depth in Dominica. We have done some work in Dominica over the past year, but I think it's one of those things where you have limited resources, so we can't always work in every island, but we always welcome continued conversations with governments and utilities because other than being an advocate for transitioning our energy systems for the many benefits that we talked about all night, we try to be a partner with particularly governments and utilities.
But what are the islands that you're now working with now, David? Any of the islands you're working with now?
Yeah, Kaithlyn, I don't know if you want to take that question.
I'm happy to, sure. So over the years we've worked with, I think our total's up to 19 islands in the Caribbean. A few where we have a lot of comprehensive work going on right now would include the Bahamas, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, St. Lucia, Puerto Rico. I'm sure I'm missing a few here, David. There's some where we are doing, one specific effort. And somewhere we're working more across the board on what does this transition look like across the whole island.
Yeah, and as Kaithlyn mentioned, we've worked across 19 different. So from year to year, it may switch. There are some islands where we have a countries where we have worked consistently, um, and that's just the nature of how the program is designed. Um, but but particularly, it shifts from year to year depending on the types of projects that we're working on.
All right. Well, all good things have to come to an end at some point or the other. This one looks like we have to, it's time to start winding down, David. I wanted to go to Mark Marie to sort of make your final comments, Mark, as we come to a close. I know I know you like the idea of the what can come out of geothermal. I know you like hydro because we have some experience in that, but I can see already that you're convinced that there are some possibilities for solar. Mark, your closing remarks, Mark? You need
Well,
to,
well, well, my closing comments are that
yeah.
definitely a mix of renewable energy for local
Hmm.
consumption is definitely feasible and useful, in fact, so that we have multiple sources for our energy needs on the island. However, beyond or just our own energy consumption needs, we need to have something to export because our export earnings are not very large from the usual normal exports that countries make. We know that we have a bit of a fairly large foreign income from an unorthodox means of selling services, which is citizenship. Um, but we need to export something more durable and sustainable. And I think we should not limit ourselves to the short term. We should think in terms of long term because the world is expected to be here for a couple billion years more. So we should plan for the future. And from all appearances, the future of energy, especially energy in the form of electricity, is going to be nuclear fusion. And we have an opportunity to participate in that new frontier. Yes, if we have our geothermal energy, which we have a lot of in Dominica, that's in a sense too large for us to use, but we must think in terms of using it so that we can participate in the new frontier of energy, which is nuclear fusion for the powering of machines and other uses that domestic uses and so on. That's where I think we should be thinking of so that now, especially that we have done already quite a bit of expenditure on preliminary studies and so on to make sure that the geothermal thing that we have now is workable, that we should work towards getting our production of geothermal energy as large as possible, bearing in mind, as Dr. Bunker said, there the need for leaving land for other uses, for housing, agriculture, recreation, etc. That so that we can participate in the new form of energy that's going to power the world.
Yes, and
And
Mark, the other thing too is that we have to look at the linkages, right?
mhm,
Because I mean, obviously, there's linkages for the industry. You have your agriculture, which is one of the mainstays of a country like Dominica, the nature island of the Caribbean. So it's obvious that there's certain amount of consideration has to be given to agriculture as a major sector. And the choices that you make in the energy that you're going to use obviously could impact your agriculture. As the caller said, it is not just a matter of the hydro, using the hydro, but also he spoke about the dams. And you
mhm.
could collect this water and provide irrigation for your farms. So,
Yes, of course.
so in other words, so when we look at the possibilities and all of those options, we have to take in consideration the linkages, the backward and forward linkages. As you're looking at forward linkages with the market for hydrogen, for example, as a major export, which is great, as a
Mhm.
commodity because it's easy to carry. The tanks, the tanks are there already, boats are there already. But I think, Mark, let's comment a little bit about that linkage before agriculture, because I do not see solar impact in agriculture in a negative way, except insofar as it were to take up land that might be zoned up for agriculture, but I would imagine that there would be zones. And if you're looking specifically at the West Coast, then certainly you're not looking at taking up too much agricultural land in the interior on the East Coast and so on. So let us take a look at that linkage for a minute, Mark, if you'd like to. I'm looking
Well,
at
yes.
it as an economist. I want you to put on your cap as an economist now.
Right. There are always what are called the externalities when one engages in any activity. Some externalities are negative and some are positive. So, in terms of any activity which we should undertake, for example, in terms of the technology that we choose to use for geothermal, we'd have to think of the negative and positive externalities. Some technologies are more, if you like, polluting than others. And there are newer technologies that are being used now that lower the risk of pollution from production of energy through geothermal means. Yes, so we must always look beyond the obvious. We need the energy and forget about the positive and negative externalities. For example, we don't have snow in Dominica and it's not cold, but in Iceland, and it's the Icelanders who drilled here in Dominica for us. They have a big investment in geothermal power, and they have lots of volcanoes and so on. And they use the heat from the geothermal plant after the steam has come up and spun the turbine to keep their streets free from ice. So because they line the streets with these pipes, so the streets are kept warm, so that even in the winter time you won't skid and crash your car because you don't see the black ice on the tarmac. So there are other uses for that. In our case, for example, there is a growing interest in the Moringa oleifera, which is an agricultural thing, if you like, where people need to dry the leaves and so on before they pulverize them. The heat that's generated from a geothermal production can be diverted immediately towards drying these things, as well as, somewhat curiously, most people might not realize that you need heat to create cold. That's how your fridge works. Your fridge works by heating up a gas. When the gas gets heated up, it gets cold. So we could also use that heat directly to provide cooling, which would allow us, for example, I don't know if people know that everybody loves Facebook, but Facebook's biggest server farm is actually in Sweden. And the reason it's in Sweden is because Sweden is pretty far north where it's pretty cool and cold all year round. And secondly, Sweden has a large number of very skilled programmers and the sort of people who work in ITC. So there are other industries that can be developed based on the use of energy. But as I was telling you just before we had cut off the first time there, that when my friend from Domlek calls me, I ask her this question: what's the state of the economy? And she finds that amusing. But I explain to her like she's in a position to know what the state of the economy is, because the state of the economy is reflected in the consumption of electricity. So if
Right.
electricity is consumption is going down, she can confidently say the economy is not producing as much this year as it did last year, because energy and your economic well-being go together. Yeah, even your physical body, your the state of your health is reflected in your energy consumption and your energy output. you know so energy is a capital thing that everybody needs, and we can use it strategically to develop our economy. Today I was at a conference there. We're talking about the economics of innovation. Yes, as a discipline within the large economic field. So that's where the question of innovation comes in. If there is energy, then we have to think about how can we use the energy besides lighting up our bulbs or using it to go on the internet to watch naked girls or whatever. Um, so there are a lot of things that can come from having energy particularly when you have it at a cost that's low. And that's where the geothermal potential comes in. And as David said, and I agree with him definitely, that in the short term, we should look towards these already established, in at least in the Caribbean, alternative sources of producing energy like solar, some more hydro, and some wind. And between these three sources, I think we could probably produce all the electricity we consume locally. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I mean, clearly, when the point you made about economics, well, this thing is clear, Domlek, and the people at Domlek see it in the rate at which people are paying electricity bills. I mean, I think David made the point as well. I mean, because if you look at the amount of money people spend on electricity bills, that is where your investment is coming from. I mean, that is where you're raising the money to create investment to a large extent. But I mean, we probably see a lot more pay-as-you-go customers if Domlek now, because they have to watch the cost now because of the price of electricity has gone up so far. So I'm sure people at Domlek would have noticed that. But Dr. Bonker, I wanted to come to you and as Mark is talking about the alternatives and he is talking about all the pros and cons and all the external factors, the negatives and the positives of the various options that we have, like geothermal. It's obvious that if you were to do environmental impact assessment studies in terms of geothermal energy versus solar energy, I may be wrong. I might probably the new kid on the beach, but probably you may find that the impact may not be as great with solar as it might be with geothermal, because I think if you're doing geothermal, an whole area, depending on the technology that you're using. If you're in an agricultural belt, for example, you have to be very cautious about what you use there, how you're going to dispose of whatever waste you have. So can we talk about that a couple of minutes as you wind up?
We can, yes. Yeah, I've really appreciated the whole conversation today, especially the linkages. Everything is so linked within the energy sector. All these different options can work well together and balance each other between energy and other sectors. There's all these links and pieces that can work together, can cause problems. And so as we've been saying, we're focused on costs here and the opportunity to save costs, but all of the other potential benefits, all of the other potential costs, maybe not money costs, but environmental costs or other types of costs have to be considered. So certainly for any project, you'd want to look at what is the direct impact locally of that and ensure that the risks are mitigated as much as possible. I would agree on your hypothesis there of generally an environmental impact assessment around solar might identify some things to be cautious about maybe species that live there, plant or animal species, things to think about for that type of installation. But in general, it's not a significant environmental impact to install solar. And in fact, we talked about another linkage here between solar and agriculture and examples of projects in the Caribbean of crops growing among solar panels, animals grazing among them. And so, it is a project to come in and construct and pour foundation and build the solar array. Once it's in place, there's opportunities then to have that connection, that link to other uses of the land in that same area.
But tell me, what are you finding generally, some of the islands that you're working with? What is the experience like for some of the islands, and from in terms of the experience that you yourself are getting from working with them? Because I'm sure each island is kind of different to some extent. Some may be similar, but some of them will be different. What are you finding, and what are the major advantages? In other words, these people are taking an opportunity and making an investment. Making an investment in the future. But the future is not really, because it's already making savings, right? And they're recovering. If you're recovering your investment in 3 to 5 years, it's almost like now, So because things are moving so quickly these days, 5 years is a very short space of time. And so what are you finding when you look at some of these islands, the benefits that they reap in, the difficulties that they have in, the challenges that they encounter in getting there, and the challenges for the policymakers in taking those decisions, and whether it's a private sector you're dealing with or the public? What are you finding in some of the islands?
Sure. Well, you're absolutely right. Each island is different. I learn something every time I visit an island. Every time I talk to somebody from a different island, I continue to learn more and more and understand what are the priorities of each specific place. But some of the commonalities that I've seen, in particular among islands that are pursuing renewable energy, pursuing solar as part of that, is a focus on their local priorities, what's important locally, and the opportunity for local ownership. And in some cases, that means literally owning the panels, right? Whether that's the utility company or a community within an island. But I mean ownership more broadly than that as well, the ownership over the energy transition. And island residents saying, this is what's important to us. This is what we want to see. And we see how solar can move us in that direction. And so we're playing a part of that. We're making the decisions. We're owning the future of our island. And so that for me has been a common theme when I speak with, whether it's the utility, a local community, the government, all kinds of stakeholders within islands, of the opportunity for that local driving from locally of what they want to see and making that happen has been a big impact.
But how easy has it been? Locals obviously want to see some kind of ownership, and it's good for people to have ownership of their resources. How easy has it been for some of the locals in some of the islands to take a piece of that ownership there?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. It depends on the place. Again, as I mentioned, sometimes that looks like actual ownership, right? Owning the project. Sometimes it looks more like saying, this is where we want to go. We want our utility to go after this and the utility to own the project. And as the utility, that is really owned by the whole island, as the utility serves our whole island. And that impacts all of our electricity costs, all of our air that we breathe every day. And so seeing both communities within islands, right? Certain specific places within, but then each island itself as a whole community. And seeing people come together and say, yes, we see this transition happening and we see the benefits it has for us, even if it is the utility owning a project or the government owning a project or a private individual owning a project. It's all part of the future of the island that we want to see.
Yes, and David, well, you have the final word. Thanks so much for that, Dr. Bonker. David, you have the final word. You can see now, let's put the whole thing together. We covered some ground here tonight. We looked at various mixes. We looked at some challenges. We looked at some impacts, some negative, some positive. We looked at some benefits. We looked at some costings and some investment options. Obviously, I mean, it looks attractive. You can recover your investment within 5 years. And then after that, you're practically on a free joyride, right? So, I mean, it's a good thing to think about. I mean, it's something that you can sell to policymakers. I'm sure you've sold to some of them in the region because they like to think, hey, we own our stuff in 5 years, right? And if the people, as Dr. Bonker was saying, if the people can have a part of that ownership, a significant part of that ownership, whether through a utility or directly by owning the panels themselves, because as you said earlier, in some cases, a lot of those panels are on rooftops, on houses. So if you have a community that's doing a development, a residential project, they can simply say, okay, we're going to build 100 homes and we're going to put panels on all of those 100 homes. And that entire community there, it can become almost self-sufficient, right? You can create some kind of grid. Let's talk about that a little bit as we wind up, David.
Yeah, I think that's a great way, great segue into community solar, which is something that is to the heart of what my colleague, I say Kaithlyn, but Dr. Bunker has been talking about, and that is local ownership, right? That can vary in many ways. In Bermuda, they want to do a specific site, specific community solar site where persons who may not be able to afford to participate can be part of that investment in that local site or local project. So it takes shape in different ways in different islands. Mia Motley made a pronouncement a week ago about everyone in Barbados having the ability to invest in a rooftop solar system if they care to do so. But there are many pathways to make this happen. One of the things that you mentioned earlier is that Dominica, the government of Dominica, has repurchased the shares in Dominic. That means that Dominic is now a national asset, right? A national utility. When Dominic saves, the government and investors, the government and consumers who are citizens of the country save, right? When Dominic is successful, the country is also successful. So you can take ownership in various ways and participation in various ways. But at the end of the day, what I do like is that we're talking about all things that are beneficial, right? None of this conversation is about what is bad for Dominica. It's all about what is best for Dominica. And what we're saying here is that there is a point right now today where we can make certain decisions that could accelerate not only the Dominica's transition to renewable energy and renewable sources, but accelerate to tremendous cost savings and avoid a lot of hardship in the years to come. So like we said, we always keep an open line and opportunity, and we actively will reach out to Dominica to make sure that we can provide any support in any capacity that we can with our resources to help the transition along.
Yes, and thank you so much for that, David. I want to thank all our folks on Facebook, still Michael and Johnny the Prince and David and Penny and all the other folks that stay with us on Facebook. Happy you could be with us here tonight. Hope you'll join us again next Tuesday for another show. Next week we talk about crime and the whole question of social responsibility. And so that should be an interesting topic. This is what we had planned to talk about tonight, but then I got a call from Matt, and Matt, we changed this, so we'll do this next Tuesday. So David and Dr. Bunker and Mark, I want to thank you so much. And we thank all our listeners, wherever you've been in Dominica, in every community in Dominica, we're all over the globe, because we know we have many people listening everywhere. We're very happy that we appreciate you. We call you the Q family. And happy to have you with us tonight, like you do, like you stay with us every night. And I want to thank Lambi on the console with us, who took our calls. We didn't take all of the calls Lambi wanted to take, but we always promise to do that, and we always fall short there because the conversation gets so intense that sometimes we get carried away in it and we forget to take the call. So I apologize, many of you who wanted to make a call and didn't get to. Hopefully next time we'll take your call. And thanks to Sheridan for keeping us on it. Yeah. And so just want to say good night and thanks everybody. So thanks David, and thanks Dr. Bunker, and thanks Mark. Thanks everybody. And let me just say good night, everybody. Take care, guys. See you again sometime.
Good night. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
See you soon. Right.
All right.
Good.
Mark, take care.
McCathy.
All right.
Then we
Bye
can
again.
always use some bunker fuel one of these days.
You look like you want to go into the military, man.
Yeah, man.
You ever thought about?
There's
No?
a kind of fuel that's called bunker fuel. They use it.
Yeah,
I know. I know. All right.
All right. Good then.
Everybody. Good night.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Okay. Bye.
Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc., Nidcliff, uniting our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean Nature Islanders and friends of Dominica at home and abroad, coming together to help preserve the integrity of Dominica's democracy, human rights, and civil liberties, ensuring free, fair, and competitive elections on a level playing field within a system that guarantees freedom of expression, belief and association, respect for the inalienable rights of individuals and minorities, respect for the rule of law, for free communications media, and free from psychological, mental, and physical abuse of women, minors, the elderly, and young men. Meantime, the people of Salisbury were tear gassed and shot at while they slept the night before the general election in December 2019 by local law enforcement aided and abetted by regional security forces. patriots appear ready to take the biggest step to fight this cancer that is ravaging every organ of good governance in Dominica. Patriots appear ready to join the legal fight to have the highest court in the region decide once and for all if Dominica should continue to operate as a rogue state where the state's coffers may be starved while secretive accounts in unknown places are filled to the brim with taxpayers' money. Nidcliffe, join the fight to save Dominica from this malevolent cancer. Make your contribution, however modest, to support the legal challenge to account for Dominica's millions. The law is on your side. Every patriot should be on your side. Nidcliffe, support our radiothon, fundraising events, subscriptions, GoFundMe, and other initiatives to help raise funds to support a legal challenge against the siphoning of public funds from the Consolidated Fund and other initiatives and actions. Nidcliffe, Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc., working to help unify and build Dominica and our Afro-Caribbean and Kalinago brothers and sisters at home and abroad. Nidcliffe, fighting to save our Nature Island Dominica. Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc. Nidcliffe, uniting our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean Nature Islanders and friends of Dominica at home and abroad, coming together to help preserve the integrity of Dominica's democracy, human rights, and civil liberties, ensuring free, fair, and competitive elections on a level playing field within a system that guarantees freedom of expression, belief and association, respect for the inalienable rights of individuals and minorities, respect for the rule of law, for free communications media, and free from psychological, mental, and physical abuse of women, minors, the elderly, and young men. Some reported $4 billion from the sale of Dominica's Sacrament of Sovereignty, our citizenships, are alleged to have been deposited in mysterious foreign bank accounts controlled by two men, a shady Lebanese operative and a lead policy director. It is alleged that from this fund, the authorities have illegally and corruptly paid the way for thousands of Dominicans living abroad to travel to Dominica on the eve of general elections to vote strategically to help keep their government in power. Even worse, this money, which should have legally been deposited in the Consolidated Fund, has allegedly been used for every purpose imaginable for the sole goal of allowing government to remain in power. As a result of this illegal diversion of state funds, which is publicly acknowledged, Dominicans have been economically brought to their knees, while large buildings whose ownership is unknown are sprouting all over the country. Our architectural heritage is being desecrated. One party mysteriously erects an imposing headquarters in the city. Foreign artists are paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to hold partisan concerts in Dominica. Support our radiothon, fundraising events, subscriptions, GoFundMe, and other initiatives to help raise funds to support a legal challenge against the siphoning of public funds from the Consolidated Fund and other initiatives and actions. Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc. Nidcliffe, working to help unify and build Dominica and our Afro-Caribbean and Kalinago brothers and sisters at home and abroad. Nidcliffe, fighting to save our Nature Island Dominica.
Looking out my window, and I'm a thinking of tomorrow, and I'm a wondering what the future will be. Thinking of the children who are the victims of oppression, beaten down by words and eaten up by starvation. I'm saying, when this ugly will be over, and the children can go out and play. I wanna see when all oppression will be done, and the people will rise up and say, freedom at last, freedom at last, so free, freedom has come, freedom has come. Oh Sitting in seclusion, dumbing in my meditation, and I can hear the voice of the sufferers cry for justice. Ooh, another ugly war is raging, threats of nuclear wars are rising, and the world is gripped by fear of mass destruction. I'm saying, when there's ugly war be over, and the children can go out and play. I wanna see when all oppression will be done, and the people will rise up and say, freedom at last, freedom at last. So free, freedom has come, freedom has come. Oh yeah, oh yeah. So much bloodshed and sorrows. There is no future for the youths of tomorrow. Yeah. So many mothers crying, so many funerals. Oh, when will it end? Yeah, when there's ugly will be over, and the children can go out and play. I wanna see when all oppression will be done, and the people will rise up and say, freedom must go.
Returned to Chimbu in 1980 when she was 13 years old.
For me, it was the place that I loved. It was home. There's a real sense of belonging. You feel that it's a family and people that you would like to rely on when there are good times, but they also have their bad side of it. But for me, at that time, it was just like a fairy tale stories or things like this.
Fairy tale stories of people being witches?
Yes.
And what sort of stories would you hear?
Oh, I could hear stories like, there was this young man who died in that village, and then they accused other women and they killed them, or they accused this old man and they killed them. I could hear stories like this.
So thinking about the other side of that, this idea of people being witches, was that something that was normal to you as a child? As a child, did you believe it?
As a child, when I came back, I didn't really see the evidence of it, but I had women being killed and tortured and all this, and they said because of witches and sorcery and all this. And I did believe in it at first.
But when Monica was about 14, these fairy tales became a lot more real.
I went through an experience when I was small, I think in my 8th grade, and there was a death in the village. There was this young cousin of mine who passed away. And we went to the village to bury her. And we heard shouts in the night. And they dragged out some women out of the house. And at the time, they told us, all the children, to go to sleep. But I could hear women screaming. And we could hear shouts in the dark, and we could hear from others whispering that they're doing the witch hunt, like they're hunting women to kill them. And in the morning, like, they could not talk about it. It only happens in the night, and in the morning, people tend to pretend that everything was okay.
And this woman was accused of killing your young cousin through witchcraft.
Yes.
So when that happened, when you were young, when you heard all of that unfold in the middle of the night, did you assume that this woman had killed your cousin, that had happened?
At that time, like, I never thought about that.
Perhaps tales of witches, secret attacks, and women screaming in the night were just too much for Monica to wrap her head around at that age. Even though the memories are still vivid for Monica, she had more typical concerns at the time, like keeping her siblings in check.
Being the eldest of 7 was the biggest role. Like, I have the responsibility of taking care of my younger siblings. I do a lot of babysitting, and also, like, I could get up very early in the morning to cook breakfast and all this.
You also had this younger brother. Were you close to him?
Oh, yeah, we were close. We used to play around together. Yeah, because we go swimming and we do all these things together. Because we have 2 big rivers that flows in our village. So we could go swimming, and we could, dig food, cow, and all the sweet potatoes, and come and cook them over the fire. It was like fun. We enjoyed all these things.
Monica was the responsible eldest daughter, although she wasn't entirely squeaky clean. As a teenager, she loved dancing, and knowing her parents wouldn't let her out at night, she devised a plan so that she could hit the town with her friends and sneak back in without getting caught.
I could go out with my friends. We could go out to dance, and then we'll come back to the house. And when we were teenagers, I had the bond with my sister. I would tie a string to her hand and then push it through the window and put it under the house. Because if I come and knock on the door, my parents would hear me coming in. So I could come and just pull the strings so that she could come and open the door, and then I could sneak in with my other friends.
So, it's such an elaborate system. I love that you developed that. So you would literally be yanking the string out of the window and waking up your poor sister in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
But when Monica was 19, her mother died suddenly, leaving her to cope with raising her brothers and sisters as well as her grief. Those carefree nights of sneaking out with her friends were over.
At the time, I was trying to enjoy my life as a teenager, but then at the same time, it was really hard. I was 19 when my mother passed away, straight after coming back from the college. And I didn't work when my mother passed away. And my father wanted to get married again. So I knew that was my responsibility to take care of my younger siblings. Because we're a family, and there is no one that they could look upon for help to support them. So I knew that was my duty to do it. So it was a really tough time that I went through.
You did get married not that long after your mother died. Did her death play any role in your decision to get married?
Yes. To me, it was like I just needed someone to help me and support me, to look after my siblings. I really didn't think about myself at the time.
Monica kept on trying to make everything work and keep everyone happy. She cared for her siblings, then her own 3 children came along. But cracks started to appear in her marriage and worsened when the family moved to the town of Gregoire, and her husband spent more and more time away from home.
He started going out with his other colleagues, and he started wanting to practice polygamy, so that's where my marriage ended.
So he wanted to bring another woman into your marriage?
Yes.
Do you remember the conversation that you had around that with your husband?
At first, it wasn't easy to bring another woman into your house. But I did talk to him about it. and told him that, like, if he continues to do that, then I could move out of his life. But he continued doing what he did, so yeah.
Initially, when Monica left, she went to her father's house and took her 3 children with her. But it was hard trying to raise them in a house already full of her nieces and nephews. So she made the agonizing decision to leave her children with her husband and move back to her father's house alone. It must have been so tough having that conversation with your children and explaining to them what would be happening.
I waited until my 2 children were already in high school, and the youngest was in primary school, and they saw what was going on, because we could have fights almost once a fortnight. So I had a conversation with my children. My children told me to go. They said they'll be okay to live with him, because I wanted to take my children with me, but then I knew it was hard to bring them back to my place. I tried, and I knew that if they stay back with their father, he could look after them financially. That was the only reason I left them.
Mm-hmm. So when you moved back to your father's house and your children were with your husband, how was it being apart from them in those first days and weeks?
Oh, it wasn't easy. Like, I could really break down and cry. It was really hard, just leaving my children and coming away like this. It was a really difficult time for me. It took time. Slowly, like, I got over it, but I could go and visit them often because it's not far from where they were living.
That experience of standing up for yourself and leaving your marriage, how do you think it changed you as a person?
I think it has 2 sides to it. The other side is like, I neglected my children. That was the bad side of it. I know I failed them. But like the other side, that I felt that I made a courage decision to walk out. But sometimes I sit back and think that I was greedy. Like, if I stayed back, I should have looked after my children. So I used to think about it too. But I made a good decision also to walk out.
Would you say that you felt like a stronger person afterwards?
Yeah, when I walked out of the relationship with my husband, I felt I had more courage.
As hard as it was being away from her children, Monica gradually rebuilt her life back in her father's home. But then something happened that would destroy everything she'd been working towards. It was 2005, and the day began like any other. Monica had just nipped out to buy some groceries.
This was around 2 or 3 o'clock. I walked out to the shop. My father was okay when I walked out, but he went into the shower room and he collapsed. And they rushed him to the hospital. That attack, and he died. I wasn't there with him. And that was like the hardest part of my life.
So you went, it all sounds like it was incredibly sudden. If it's not too painful for you to recount, how did you find out that he died?
I had people saying that my father was rushed to the hospital, so I came to the house. But when I came to the house, my brother was there, and he couldn't give me a chance. I don't know, he just came up and he told me, like, you killed him. That's it. That was the word he said.
So that was how you found out that your father had died. Your brother said to you, you killed him.
What was going through my mind was like, I couldn't accept what he said. And also, quickly, fear just crept up in me. And I was also confused. I really couldn't really describe that moment there. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to help myself. You killed him.
And you say that fear crept up because when your brother said to you, you killed your father, the insinuation is that you had killed him because you were a witch, that you'd done it through witchcraft.
Yes.
Was anyone else there when he made that accusation?
People were already there. They were mourning and all this, and he said it in front of people.
So when he said that in front of people, how did the people around you react?
The people around me are the very people that I call family and friends, and the ones that I could depend on. The moment I looked at them, I feel that I was the bad one. I could feel stigma all around me.
So it was that quick. The minute he said it, you immediately felt this change in the atmosphere.
Yeah, I felt a change in the atmosphere because you could see people you could see them looking at you as the bad person, and anything could happen to you.
And when you say anything, when did you begin to realize how dangerous this situation could be for you?
I have had stories and I have people accusing others. And for me, it was just like that. I just felt that fear in me. I could really sense that.
Those memories from Monica's childhood, the accusations, the screams in the night felt chillingly close. And Monica asked herself, what will they do to me?
I was just saying people could come and hit me. They could do anything.
Was there anything that you could say back to him? Did you respond to him when he said that?
I just said, how could you call me that? And I started crying because I don't know what to say next. He just said, you